Good evening. Thank you all for joining us today for the Simpson Center Annual Digital Humanities Lecture, Resurrecting the Black Body, Race and the Digital Afterlife, with Dr. Tonia Sutherland. My name is Randy Evans, and I'm the Associate Curator of Programs here at the Henry. I'd like to open our time together by sharing the Henry's land acknowledgement. We at the Henry Art Gallery live and work on the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples and the shared waters of all tribes and bands, named and unnamed, including Suquamish, Duwamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. The land acknowledgement reminds us of our connections, indebtedness, and responsibilities to the peoples and the more than human kin where we live and work. We invite you to join us in paying respects to elders past, present, and future, and to consider what paying those respects means within the work that we do as individuals and within institutional frameworks. Tonight's program is presented in partnership with the Simpson Center-funded cross-disciplinary research cluster, Black Digital Studies in the Age of Techno-Fascism, comprised of faculty from across the humanities and social sciences here at UW. We are pleased to work with them in building opportunities for public engagement, scholarship, and discourse around the racialized perils and possibilities of digital technologies, particularly in relationship to digital, visual, and material art and culture. Dr. Sutherland's work holds a number of thematic resonances with the Henry's current exhibition, Camila Janan Rashid, We Leak, We Exceed, on view in our galleries downstairs. Rashid's work utilizes archival and found text, images, and video to draw parallels between digital compression and the containment of people, proposing an embrace of Black excess and expansion as a liberatory practice. If you haven't seen the exhibition, I would encourage you to do so before it closes at the end of April. This program was made possible by the Walter Chapin Simpson Center for the Humanities and co-sponsored by the UW Departments of American Ethnic Studies, Cinema and Media Studies, History, Geography, and Sociology, and by the UW Honors Program. Before we get started, a few notes. The lecture will be about 40 minutes, and there will be time for audience questions at the end. Live AI captioning is provided on the screen, and you can find assisted listening devices on the table outside if you'd like to use them. We also have ASL interpretation today. Thank you again for being here, and I will now turn it over to Dr. Jelani Eanes.
Thank you, Randy. As she said, my name is Jelani Eanes, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology. I'd like to again formally welcome you to the 2026 Digital Humanities Lecture organized by the Simpson Center for the Humanities. Tonight's event, as Randy said, is the brainchild of a cross-disciplinary research cluster sponsored by the Simpson Center entitled Black Digital Studies in the Age of Techno-Fascism, which is organized to push our thinking concerning the racialized perils of digital technologies for our present and future. The research cluster is organized by 4 faculty here at the University of Washington: LaShonda Pittman, John Hanar, Honors Professor in Western Civilization and Associate Professor of American Ethnic Studies, myself, Christelle Olukoy, Assistant Professor of Geography, and Golden Owens, Assistant Professor of Cinema and Media Studies, along with our community partners here at the UW, including the Departments of American Ethnic Studies, Cinema and Media Studies, Sociology, Geography, History, and the University of Washington Honors Program. I would like to express gratitude to the Henry Art Gallery for providing the venue, staffing, accessibility, and technical support to make this happen. So it is my delight and honor to introduce Dr. Tonia Sutherland. Dr. Sutherland is an associate professor and associate dean for faculty development in the School of Education and Information Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles. She is the author of Resurrecting the Black Body, Race and the Digital Afterlife, which was published in 2023 by the University of California Press. In addition to being the founder and co-founder being the founder and director of Pendulum and the Black Memory Collective, she also serves as co-director of the Community Archives Lab at UCLA and co-founder and co-director of Afterlife here at the University of Washington. Dr. Sutherland serves on the advisory board of the Center for Critical Race and Digital Studies at NYU and is a member of the UCLA Center for Critical Internet Inquiry Scholar Council. Dr. Sutherland is an internationally recognized expert in data futures, particularly data longevity and digital immortality, Black digital archives, and Black memory work. Her work critically examines the analog histories of modern information and communication technologies, addresses trends of racialized violence in 21st century digital cultures, and interrogates issues of race, gender, and culture in archival and digital spaces. In her work, Dr. Sutherland focuses on various infrastructures, technological, social, human, and cultural, addressing important concerns such as gaps in issues of equity and inclusivity, and developing more liberatory praxis. The title for our lecture this evening is Resurrecting the Black Body, Race in the Digital Afterlife. We are certainly in for a treat. Please welcome me in joining Dr. Sutherland to the stage.
Good evening. What a joy to be here. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. The night of April 15th, 2012, rolled in hot. Indio, California, which lies in the Coachella Valley of Southern California's Colorado Desert region, about 2 hours east of Los Angeles, has a warm winter and hot summer desert climate. Indio's climate, however, is not what makes it noteworthy. Instead, it is known for the numerous cultural events the city holds every year, most notably the Coachella Valley Music and Arts Festival. Every year, without fail, the Coachella Festival draws huge crowds to Indio. The days-long festival features musical artists from many genres of music, including rock, pop, indie, hip-hop, and electronic dance music, as well as art installations and sculptures. In 2012, 15 years, 7 weeks, and 3 days after he was pronounced dead from the 5 gunshot wounds he had sustained in Las Vegas, thousands of Coachella fans got a chance to see the impossible. For just under 5 minutes, people in the Indio Desert witnessed living history as Tupac Shakur took the stage and rocked the mic alongside Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre for a once-in-a-lifetime performance. The only problem was that this performance didn't happen during Tupac's lifetime. Even though he had passed away in 1996, his likeness had been resurrected from the dead as a digital projection on stage, giving viewers a chance to experience an ephemeral moment from the past, a live Tupac concert. But as Aisha Harris remarked in a June 2017 Slate article, looking like Tupac is not the same as acting like Tupac. The resurrection of Tupac Shakur is one of the many stories and cases that I explore in my book, Resurrecting the Black Body, which is an analysis of anti-Black digital violence and Black digital afterlives. While this book looks at the ways the Black community has been harmed in digital spaces, the heartbeat of this work is its contribution to the project of Black liberation, especially in spaces where that liberation is premised on empowering Black techno-social futures. To help frame the conversation, I should also say that I mainly approach this work from my training in history, as well as archival, information, cultural, and performance studies. The project has its roots in the information ecosystem that I was living in during the hurricane season in the fall of 2005. To be honest with you, I found myself completely overwhelmed in the midst of the television and internet footage of Hurricane Katrina and in the aftermath of the storm. On every screen, there were dead Black bodies floating in the overflowing waters of Lake Pontchartrain, dead Black bodies floating in the streets of my beloved city, New Orleans. Those images stayed with me, they haunted me, they deeply saddened me. And so nearly a decade later, when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri, I was horrified to see that law enforcement had left his dead body in the middle of the street to rot in the hot August sun. I was even more horrified when I learned that during that time, his remains were photographed, and those photographs were published to the internet. I was immediately taken back to Katrina, and it occurred to me that there must be reasons that the dead bodies I was seeing displayed so callously on television and online were overwhelmingly Black bodies, Black people's bodies. There must be reasons that anti-Blackness for entertainment purposes in digital spaces continues even after a person dies. There must be reasons that anti-Blackness has not only a digital life, but a digital afterlife. So I set out to find what those reasons were. And so today, in our brief time together, I'd like to share some of that journey with all of you. I'd like to begin by considering what it means that records created during the era of expansive colonial power and chattel slavery have moved to online environments, what I call the digital afterlives of slavery archives. The archives of Atlantic slavery were created by colonizers and slaveholders. Rather than being faithful representations of the colonized and enslaved, they are a deeply complex, fraught, and often problematic set of sources that speak to how archives hold, produce, and reproduce agency, privilege, and power. The mass digitization and datafication of slavery-era archives has arguably contributed to a distancing of the lived experience of enslaved people from what we imagine slavery to have been, slavery's historical imaginary, if you will. This distancing leaves a huge temporal gap between the violence of the past and the visual experience of the present. And then two things typically happen. First, digital environments remove the immediacy of trauma that you would bear witness to if you encountered the same record in a more material, visceral, and tactile way. There is a reason that people stand in line to see the Declaration of Independence in Independence Hall, right? The second thing that happens is that the now digital, distanced version of the records that document that trauma are bestowed with new afterlives, often circulating independent of any historical context. So, for example, the Lillenquist family collection of Civil War photographs at the Library of Congress, which documents both the Union and the Confederacy during the American Civil War, boasts a robust collection of cartes de visite. In one, a shirtless man is seated sideways in his chair with his back to the camera. His face is in profile, his left hand resting on his hip with his elbow out to the side, accentuating the shape of his muscular back. His back, which is clearly meant to be the focal point of the image, is covered in a network of thick, knotted keloid scars. Printed on verso are the words, "From Life," taken at Baton Rouge, Louisiana, April 2nd, 1863. Also on verso is a hand-scrawled note that reads, "I have found a large number of the 400 contrabands examined by me to be as badly lacerated as the specimen represented in the enclosed photograph." In November 2015, an auction house, a nearly identical carte de visite, dated April 12, 1863, was sold by Boston-based auction house Skinner Auctioneers for $7,995. On verso, or on the back, on reverse, this card displays typescript text on a separate piece of paper attached to the card's surface. The typed text reads, in part, "10 days from today, I left the plantation. Overseer Aratu Carrier whipped me. I was 2 months in bed, sore from the whipping, and my sense began to come. I was sort of crazy. I tried to shoot everybody. They said so. I did not know. I did not know that I had attempted to shoot everyone. They told me so. I burned up all my clothes. but I don't remember that. I never was this way, crazy, before. I don't know what made me come that way, crazy. I did not shoot anyone. I did not harm anyone. Whipped 2 months before Christmas. The very words of poor Peter as he sat for his picture. The text that appears on the back of this portrait is the documented written record of oral testimony given by Gordon, known also as Peter. Gordon, the man whose image appears on these 2 archival cartes de visite, was an enslaved man who self-emancipated in March 1863 from a plantation in St. Landry Parish, Louisiana, after having barely survived the savage beating that produced the scars on his back. Gordon reported the 10-day journey on foot from St. Landry Parish to Baton Rouge to be perilous. He was barefoot, he had been chased by several men and a pack of bloodhounds. He was in dire fear for his life. When he reached the Union Army encampment along the Mississippi River, he was mustered into military service, and the Union Army conducted a, quote, surgical examination. During the exam, they saw his scourged back, and 2 itinerant photographers photographed the scars. On the 4th of July that year, the scourged back portrait and 2 other Gordon portraits appeared as wood engravings as a special Independence Day feature in Harper's Weekly, paired with a brief narrative about Gordon. The scourged back portrait of Gordon, presented alongside Gordon's own narrative, was well received, and photography studios throughout the American North began to duplicate and sell prints of the scourged back as a pop culture carte de visite. In the past few years, this image has also become the inspiration for a movie, Emancipation, starring Will Smith as Gordon. The carte de visite of Gordon quickly became an early example of the eventual widespread dissemination and circulation of ideologically abolitionist photographs, particularly among Americans in the North, depicting the social ills of human enslavement. Among Black abolitionists, however, including Frederick Douglass, who had also self-emancipated, a completely different narrative was emerging. Black abolitionists like Douglass argued that while photographs and other images might serve to demonstrate the fundamental humanity of enslaved Black people and therefore subvert anti-Black racism, seductive new technologies such as photography should be employed as a means of making should not be employed as a means of making politically minded abolitionist points about the individual humanity of Black people. And even though the photograph of Gordon is a powerful visual testimony to the brutality of American slavery, we can see from Gordon's oral testimony on the Skinner carte de visite that formerly enslaved people were perfectly capable of testifying on their own behalf. They did not need the photograph to do that for them. So for archives and for those who use them, digitization is often presented as a panacea for problems of archival preservation and access. Providing broad access to digitized artifacts, however, especially in the longer term, is oftentimes problematic. These problems, when they do arise, are not only technological, they are also economic, political, legal, and moral. Digital technologies and the new artifacts they produce can themselves result in expressions of anti-Blackness. So for example, the image of Gordon has enjoyed, as I said, a new popularity online because of the fairly recent, it's not so recent now, film directed by Antoine Fuqua and starring Will Smith entitled Emancipation. The movie, which is billed as a biopic, is loosely based on the story of Gordon and follows his journey through the swamps of Louisiana and the photographing of the scars on his back. The digitized image has appeared on news sites, on people's personal pages, on social media, and in other locations on the internet without the descriptive context that the Library of Congress site provides. In Fuqua's retelling of Gordon's narrative, the character of Gordon asks the photographers, "Why are you doing this?" To which the photographer responds with reverence and aplomb, "So the world might know what slavery truly looks like." So Joey McFarland, the film's producer, modern-day hater of slavery, and our white savior, has offered us emancipation as the great white hope, despite proffering a film that requires its viewers to sit through 2+ hours of Black degradation. Here he is, talking about the image and its history.
How you came to own the photo and why it was important for you to, once you did,
I have the photo. This is the original photograph from 1863. And I wanted it to be here tonight. I wanted a piece of Peter to be here tonight. It's sadly to say so many artifacts and photographs have not been preserved or curated or respected. And I took it upon myself to curate and build a collection for future generations. You know, I've been collecting for, a very long time. My collection will be donated at the end of my life for educational purposes, and it's something I just want to give back. But for me, my love of history, my love of truth, my love of larger-than-life individuals that had an impact on not just some people's lives, but the world, it's worth fighting for, it's worth preserving, it's worth seeking out and protecting, and that's what I sought to do. And the story that came out of that, it transcends entertainment, it transcends cinema. It is a lesson, it is a conversation that is needed, it needs to start and continue and keep growing and evolving, and we just need to come together and we need to reckon with the past so future generations don't make the same mistake.
Tell me.
He brought the picture with him. It is offense enough on its face that McFarland thinks he discovered this image, Columbused it, and this story, that he would be audacious enough to hold the image of another human's degraded body next to his own like a souvenir or fetish object is actually a bridge too far. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. While still problematizing the archives, I'd like to offer the work of Katherine Dunham as a contrast to emancipation and as an antidote, perhaps, to the approach that McFarland took to his historical subjects around issues of representation, memory, and what is ultimately our collective obligation to recognize that the person in this historical image is deserving of better, is deserving of more. In 1935, aspiring anthropologist Katherine Dunham was awarded a prestigious fellowship to conduct fieldwork in the Caribbean. Dunham, who would go on to complete her anthropology degree at the University of Chicago in 1936, was also a dancer and choreographer. And so her work in the Caribbean was animated by a profound interest in the dances of the African diaspora. Dunham's fieldwork led her on a journey through the Caribbean, where she studied the survival of traditional African dance in the face of European colonization and acculturation. She began in Jamaica and then traveled to Martinique and to Trinidad and Tobago, with the goal of gaining a deeper understanding of Shango, an African god significant in Caribbean religious culture. In early 1936, Dunham arrived in Haiti, where for several months she continued her investigation of rhythm and dance as they applied to her own ethnic and cultural background. When she entered the University of Chicago, Dunham had also begun teaching her own style of dance as a means of exploring her theoretical beliefs about the rhythms of people from the African diaspora. As a scholar, Dunham theorized that Caribbean thought and movement, particularly for those of African descent, were directly correlated to that of their African forebears. Because she was nervous about the disappearance of dances from many tribal and folk communities, and dedicated to dance as a means of crafting new Afrocentric historical narratives, Dunham recorded her findings by both writing and sketching ethnographic field notes and by learning the dance techniques, songs, and music that were shared with her during her journey throughout the Caribbean. Dunham was among the first anthropologists to use participant observation as a method. Her intentions in doing so were motivated by her desire to use her dance anthropology to address the myriad dilemmas of racism, including the loss of cultural memory facing Black Americans in the United States. Dunham believed that American slavery had broken cultural bonds, and she created cultural disruptions. And so in her work, she was intending to be restorative. That was her goal. She was intending to restore. She eventually turned her anthropological work into a pedagogy, the Dunham technique. Okay. Dunham was deeply concerned with not only preserving the practice of Dunham technique, but also documenting her process. So on one hand, Dunham technique is encoded in the bodies of those who dance it. On the other, Dunham maintained physical artifacts, the kind that are typically held in Western archival repositories. So for example, Dunham was among the first to use film to document dance traditions in the Caribbean, as well as to document and preserve her own technique. As early as the mid-1930s, Dunham was utilizing a Kodak 16mm camera to record her field studies in the Caribbean in what was, at the time, yet another innovative approach to anthropological fieldwork. Dunham asserted that to capture the meaning in the culture, in the life of the people, she felt that she had to take something directly from the people and develop that. On the experience of filming, here is Dunham in her own words.
My next attempts at cinematography were to capture what the ceremonies that I was allowed to see. And of course it was rather difficult for me because already I was infringing on some of their taboos by being there. Some of the time I was where women were not normally permitted to be. Some of the time I was where outsiders and strangers were not permitted to be. And I had to overcome that, and at the same time they did not know what was in this box that I carried and pointed at them. But like most people in societies other than their own, they don't like to have things pointed at them. And I had to find a way to fix that camera so it could be taking and recording what they were doing without making them uncomfortable. And this was my big task. I don't think, well, I haven't yet overcome it. There are times when I still film and feel that I'm intruding.
Though Dunham was, to a certain extent, allowed participatory access into ritual life in the Caribbean that the largely white and predominantly male ethnographic anthropology establishment could never attain, from her own words, you can hear her discomfort with the possibility of her recordings intruding into and interfering with the sacred practices of her Caribbean interlocutors. Today, however, along with the scourged back photograph of Gordon Peter, these moving images reside at the Library of Congress, where they comprise one element of the Katherine Dunham archival collection. The moving images and sound recordings were purchased from Dunham herself in 2001 by the Library of Congress as part of the Katherine Dunham Legacy Project. Dunham's intent in transferring the materials to the Library of Congress was, again, part of a two-pronged strategy to preserve her anthropological dance work. She viewed her dance work and the Dunham technique as an archive in and of itself, and she sought to ensure that the process by which she had created her dance work was also documented and more formally preserved. That Dunham entrusted her life's work to the Library of Congress speaks to Dunham's extraordinary trust in the library as a government institution, despite having had a promising dance career thwarted by this very same government in 1951. We can talk about that in the Q&A if you want. I understand this to mean that Dunham believed in institutions like the Library of Congress inasmuch as the basis for their very existence is to serve the common good, right? What Dunham could not have anticipated was that the Library of Congress would put these recordings online in an open access format, bypassing the permission of those whose sacred practices were documented in her films. In a long tradition of open rather than appropriate access, archivists at the Library of Congress likely did not take into consideration that what might be sacred or secret practices before posting these videos online. Neither did they consider the specificity of context under which Dunham was granted permission to view and record, or the nuance of Dunham's own stated mixed comfort with the process of recording. Instead, a fair use application of copyright was privileged over the notion of permission, which is not only an aspect of the work that Dunham documented, but also important spiritual and practical praxis in Black memory work, right? You ask for permission. While no one can predict the future, Black memory work does have an important relationship with the past. Black memory workers recognize the historical patterns of abuse and work through such modes as agency, autonomy, refusal, and commitment to mitigate against and prevent future abuses. The dances that Dunham created and the cultures and people who comprise those cultures deserve to be remembered. And they also deserve to have the terms of that remembrance disentangled from the Western white supremacist histories of American archive. Agreeing with those snaps, not just agreeing with me, right, they deserve that. Herein lies the promise and possibility of Black memory work, that what remains might be treated with care and respect, that Black memories and that the right of Black people to be remembered might not automatically be deployed in anti-Black ways and in an anti-Black world. Which, unfortunately, leads me back to Tupac. Born in Brooklyn in 1971, American rapper and actor Tupac Shakur is consistently ranked as one of the greatest and most influential rappers of all time. Fight me. Shakur's shooting and the subsequent death in 1996 was a devastating loss to his family and his friends, to be sure, and also to the Black community that loved and supported him and to whom he was also quite loyal. And of course, it was a tremendous loss to hip-hop. Then, in 2012, 16 years after Tupac's death, he was billed as a performer at Coachella. The Tupac that performed at Coachella in 2012 was, of course, not the real Tupac, just as the Whitney Houston that was performing at Harrah's in Las Vegas is not the real Whitney Houston, or the Michael Jackson that they pulled out of the grave to perform was not the real Michael Jackson. They are holograms, digital resurrections of Tupac, Whitney, Michael. These illusions themselves are nothing new. Holography and other 3D technologies, as well as 2D illusions, have been used for centuries to create lifelike reproductions of human bodies, reproductions that are capable of addressing an audience, moving around on stage, and interacting with others using pre-scripted effects. Digital resurrection is a modern phenomenon that uses a combination of innovative technologies, digital manipulations, and marketing appeal to construct a domain in which the deceased appear in new contexts as though alive today, and in some cases, as though consciously aware of their own demise. While many have touted the promise of digital resurrection technologies to extend life and liberate humanity from the inevitability of death, I argue that these are carceral technologies that work to create a specular prison, one in which spectacle goes hand in hand with carcerality and in which there is a kind of ghost slavery. Archival scholar Randall Jimerson theorizes that there are 3 different types of collecting institutions: the temple, the prison, and the restaurant. While temple institutions are collecting institutions in which the archivist preserves the original interpretation of items or collections, restaurant institutions, by contrast, are institutions where the archivist guides the user, allowing them to make their own decisions and allowing the collections and items to speak for themselves. In prison institutions, however, the archivist serves only the interpretation of an oppressive higher power. So if we consider the Tupac hologram as a record, it is of the type that belongs to the carceral archives of Jimerson's prison institutions. The posthumous hologram as record serves commercial interests, souvenir and fetish cultures, othering, spectacle, and whiteness as higher powers. Holopac is a carceral artifact, imprisoned by the archives of folklore and of longing, and digitally incarcerated by white supremacy's need to possess and control Black people's bodies. It is an artifact tangled up in an ancient pain. As Simone Brown tells us, this is what happens when certain bodies are rendered as digitized code through technologies such as facial recognition, iris and retinal scans, hand geometry, fingerprint templates, vascular patterns, gait, and other kinesthetic recognition, and increasingly, DNA. All of these ultimately treat the body as evidence that supersede individuals' accounts of who they are and whether and where they belong. Tupac may have been reconstituted and resurrected, but he has not been reincarnated by the digital. He does not get a second chance at life. Rather, his death has been co-opted and commercialized. He has no agency over his digital remains. Tupac is dead, and as we've learned from Hollywood, from the emergence of AI, and from deep fake technologies, he retains no right to how he is represented in death, no right to refuse misrepresentation. I want to be clear that we should continue to expect to see AI technologies intersecting with the digital afterlife. One example is through AI chatbot services offered by companies like Luca, the creators of Replica. Replica is the brainchild of San Francisco tech star Eugenia Quida, who in late 2015 lost her best friend, Roman Mazurenko. Quida and Roman had, over the course of their friendship, exchanged literally thousands of text messages. In her grief, Quida found herself reading through the messages she'd sent and received from Roman, and it occurred to her that embedded in all of those messages, Roman's turns of phrase, his patterns of speech, were traits intrinsic to what made him Roman. And so Eugenia Quita decided to take all of this data and use it to build a digital version of her now dead bestie, Roman. Using the chatbot structure she and her team had been developing for her company, Luca, Quita poured all of Roman's messages into a Google-built neural network, a type of AI system that uses statistics to find patterns in data, be they images, text, audio, to create a Roman bot with which she could interact, whether to reminisce about past events or to have entirely new conversations. The resulting bot was, according to Quita, eerily accurate. And so Luca decided to make a version that anyone could talk to, whether they knew Roman or not. The response Quita and her team received from users interacting with the bot, people who had never even met Roman, was startling. So in March of 2021, Luca released a new type of chatbot on Apple's App Store. Using the same structure the team had used to build the digital Roman bot, they created a system to enable anyone to build a digital representation, and they called it Replica. Replica is, at its core, a front-end data collection tool and a thinly veiled effort to use the data you feed it to construct an automated decision system, one that makes claims that it can help humans remember how to be human. Please meet Fabi. Fabi, short for fabrication, is a replica that I created for research purposes and to share with you so that you could better understand some of the tools and technologies that make up the digital immortality practices that I'm sort of critiquing here today. There are several selection options available to you when you first create a replica, and Replica knows nothing about you, the creator, until much later in the process. So you'll note that as a creator, actually you can't see it on this screen, as a creator you have the option to select skin tone, gender, hairstyle, and eye color, but you cannot select clothing or any other sort of form of individual expression. There is nothing that says you must create a replica of yourself, or that any of your personal attributes must be incorporated into the replica that you fashion. I chose to make Fabi a Black woman because I am a Black woman and I know what it means to embody that experience. It would not matter, however, whether I was a Black woman or an Asian woman or a white man. Everyone can be or have a Black friend with Replica. In other words, Replica makes it possible to try on Blackness. In this case, it makes it possible to attempt to digitally embody a Black woman's experience. This phenomenon, another clear example of the fetishization of Blackness, is increasingly common in digital environments. With roots in colonial projects, the practice known as digital blackface has become a far-reaching phenomenon. As new AI tools and technologies have made it possible, for example, to create digital facsimiles of actual deceased Black people, facsimiles that mimic their antemortem counterparts to such a degree that they are characterized by their ability to communicate from beyond the grave. They text, they instant message, they post on social media. A deeper critical analysis and intervention has become imperative. Okay. The image on your screen is of Frederick Douglass, who, as I mentioned earlier on in our time together, had very strong feelings about how photography could and should be used in terms of abolition and representations of Black life. He also had very strong feelings about how his own image could and should be used. This was not it. So, when Catherine Dunham transferred her physical archival materials to the Library of Congress, the films documenting her Caribbean research would have been made available for viewing at the Library of Congress using a preservation copy. How could Dunham possibly have known or anticipated that the portion of her memory work and the sacred practices documented therein that she put in the very capable institutional hands of the Library of Congress would find their way to Trayvon Martin's internet, the same internet that wantonly circulates images of Black Death for profit? The current affordances of the digital came to pass just as Catherine Dunham was experiencing her own rite of passage. When Dunham died at the age of 96 in May 2006, the images of Black bodies in the overflowing waters of Lake Pontchartrain in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina were ushering in a fresh, new hellscape. Dunham's death preceded the murders of Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown, and the exploitation of Black bodies on the internet for profit was in its infancy. Would this later knowledge have impacted Dunham's decisions about the conditions governing access and use for parts of the collection at the Library of Congress? This is ultimately not knowable, but what is knowable is that the people who appear in her anthropological videos did not consent to have their sacred work and spiritual practices widely available on the internet. It is vital that Black people participate in the process of establishing what is sacred, what should be withheld from the white gaze, what can be made public, and under what circumstances. It is vital that decisions be made about what is appropriate in terms of access, not just what is legal or binding. It is also vital that there is a recognition that the Black community is not a monolith by any means. The heterogeneity of the Black community means different access will be appropriate at different times for different communities. So in closing, I will argue, as I always do, that if you want to respect Black life and the lived experiences of Black people, part of the process is resisting the urge to resurrect Black bodies for entertainment, for commercial use, really for any purpose. How the ordinary and extraordinary Black people I have discussed today lived, how they died, how they are remembered, how their digital remains are constituted, and what happens to those remains is forever intimately linked to systemic and structural practices of anti-Black and often state-sponsored violence, a violence that is too frequently reinscribed and reinscribed on and reified in, and also justified by, the archival record. If you want to honor Black life, please let us rest in peace. Thank you.